1918. A freighter left the pier and kept calling from the fog. In November 1918, the ore fleet still moved under blackout rules and a sky that could not decide between snow and rain. On the superior side, ore docks loaded in sleet that ticked like pins. On the Michigan side, keepers trimmed their lamps and kept their notes. The freighter, Aurelia, steel 480 feet, hatches dogged, coal stacked to its temper, cleared the outer pier after dusk with a horn that sounded more tired than brave. Men on the breakwater counted her deck lights and got the arithmetic wrong by one, as if a star had joined the crew. The barometer sank with the stubbornness of a mule. The wind came round to the northeast as if called by its first name. Her log began as all ordinary logs do. 1815, cleared harbor. 1832, easterly swell building. 1906, ice accreting on rails and caboose ladders. 1930, reduced speed on account of fog. 2002, whistle every 2 minutes. Long. The spark set popped at intervals, a mosquito that had learned the alphabet and sent a position to whitefish the keeper could not quite hear because the aurora, thin as breath, had chosen to occupy the frequency men share, somewhere behind the bow, or settled with a complacent sound that always means money on land and patience at sea. The cook wrote pea soup on the slate. The mate checked the life belts and found one missing and told nobody because superstition chops language and throws most of it overboard. From the lighthouse at Split Rock, a log notes a vessel southbound with a wake written bright, light steady, horn correct, and then a half line, belated and stubborn, lost to fog as if put away. On the breakwater, after the horn dwindled, one man said he still felt the tremor in his ribs that ships leave when they pass, and another said that was merely the cold. The keeper at the range light folded his hands over the telephone and waited to be needed. The telephone rang once with no one on it, and he logged the call anyway because paper dislikes silence. Fog learned a new thickness after 9. It throbbed against the wheelhouse glass and turned the masthead light into a small, private moon. At 21:17, Aurelia sent a plane report. Position east of Caribou, speed slow, ice forming fast on the forecastle rail, and received a clipped acknowledgement that arrived already tired from crossing the sky. The helmsman watched the compass card hesitate, then wag its head 3 degrees like a dog refusing orders. Down in the tunnel, the shaft spoke a steady hymn, while ore ticked in the holds like a clock that preferred iron to hours. Lighthouses kept their grammar. Whitefish logged horn long every 2 minutes from a vessel unseen. Osable heard the same note wrong by a breath, as if distance had learned to lean. A tug near Paradise swore a freighter crossed her bow without hull or foam, only a pressure on the air and a shiver along the deckhouse windows, no lights but the sense of lights. The tug's skipper took off his cap to nothing in particular and wrote in his book, "Met a ship by wake." At 2:23:09, the wireless shack at Two Harbors wrote down a call that behaved like an echo. Aurelia to range, making turn, stand by. Then the same sentence again, same spacing, same sleepy spark, as if the lake had taken dictation and grown proud of its penmanship. The operator replied and heard his own words come back a shade too quickly, returned by air that had practiced. The wheelsman in Aurelia's wheelhouse steadied for the bend and felt the ship not answer, as if the lake had taken hold under the turn and asked her to consider something else. He rang slow astern. The telegraph rang back without help. The mate on the bow lifted a lantern into a world that chose not to learn its color. The log's last neat line reads, 2246. Fog thick, course held, horn long. No one wrote the obvious next line. Dawn found the lake butterflat and useless. The life-saving crew at Vermilion dragged their surf boat on skids over frost that squeaked like chalk and pulled for a horizon that kept its secrets under pewter. Messages clattered, loss of contact, believed off Caribou. Any steamer eastbound report. A trawler brought in a hatched dog struck clean through the pin, as if a great hand had decided a simpler design. Off Whitefish, a life ring bobbed close enough to read the paint before the swell nested it into fog. The keeper reached with a boat hook and came up with water and a pale thread of paint that wrote AU before it let itself be erased. They found more arguments than proofs. An oil slick stood where no ship had the manners to admit a leak. A blanket snagged on a black spruce at the high water line near Crisp Point, stiff as a board and smelling of coal smoke and mint. In the lee of a reef, the lake had arranged ore pellets into a tidy filigree like rosary beads that had forgotten their string. 2 gulls stood on a board cooked too well planed for any fisherman. The board turned and showed its stenciling, number 3 hatch, and its nail holes full of clean water. The registers on shore did not know whether to behave. At the ore dock, a clerk found the day's manifest stamped, arrived by a rubber he had not set. The letters a shade wetter than ink has any right to be at noon. At 2 harbors, the marquisette curtain by the wireless shutter lifted in a room without breeze whenever the operator wrote the name Aurelia. From the split rock logbook, a leaf loosened and slid to the floor and lay there like a sheet pulled from a bed where someone had just taken their leave. By evening, the search chart had acquired 3 circles and a question. Mark bold enough to be a sermon. Clerks tell stories with stamps. In Duluth, the steel mill's receiving office opened a pouch that had ridden east on a night train and found inside a bill of lading for ore that should have arrived with Aurelia at dawn. Across the bottom, someone had penciled the usual dockman's absolution, delivered and tallied, and then erased it to a silver smear that still said yes if you tilted it toward the window. A second sheet bore a thumbprint in coal dust and the ghost edge of a wheel mark, as if a hand and a cart had pressed through from a room that never existed. Wireless stations kept catching the same sentence they had not sent. At random hours, separated by miles and reasons, a spark would scroll, Aurelia to range, making turn, stand by. It came in like weather, modest and complete, and would not place itself when asked. Operators wrote the words and then crossed them out, because discipline is a kind of piety. A telephone on the end of the ore dock rang once at midnight. When lifted, it offered only the deep, careful breath of an empty line. The night watchman hung it back on its hook and wrote the time as if you could inventory silence. In January, the lake built panes along the shore, and taught them to listen. Between flows, a whistle sounded long and correct, answered at interval by another farther out, the way two pilots talk when the channel is narrow. On days when the ice lay still as benches, a narrow lane would open of its own preference and crease the surface with wake, then close like a book taught to be private. A logger on the North Shore watched a light move with patience from point to point, while snow erased the rest of the world. By morning there were no prints, only two straight lines of kelp left on the pebbles, as if a keel had learned to mow. Come deep winter, the lake went mute, then learned to hum through ice. Lighthouse ledgers grew a second, fainter hand in pencil, noting traffic the eyes could not keep. Southbound, horn long, eastbound, 3 short, entries placed between neat lines as if the margin itself had taken duty. A keeper at Au Sable drew a little triangle where no ship had any right to be and wrote, embarrassed by his own pencil, "Believed Aurelia." On the ore dock at 2 harbors, a watchman saw lights inside fog and counted them against the plan of a 480-footer. When he reached the stern light, he found he had counted one more than the diagrams allowed. He put that number in his pocket and told nobody. The ice spoke of Hull. On a noon still enough to shame breath, a shadow traveled under clear ice parallel to the catwalk, a long oval with interruptions where hatches might have been. It kept pace with the keeper to the end of the pier, and then turned out into blacker water without fuss or foam. At night, the lens prisms printed faint rings on the glass inside the lantern room, as if a ship had circled and circled, politely refusing to dock. A fisherman set a gill net off Knife Island and drew it at dawn to find ore pellets caught like caviar in the meshes and, tangled among them, a short length of manila with a fresh cut end. He kept the rope and drank more than usual. Not all proofs were nautical. A parish book in Superior discovered a damp oval on a page where the sexton had rested his hand. When dried by the stove, it left a wheel's imprint, 8 spokes, narrow rim. A child brought a coal to his mother that looked too round to be natural. Split, it showed a nail head buried in its heart. The mother put it back on the scuttle and went on without adjectives. Spring loosened the lake, and the living tried again. A chartered tug took divers as far as ice manners allowed. Lead lines walked the bottom. The hook came up with weeds and the occasional round pellet of ore that would not rust. A photographer in a cork vest took 3 plates of a pewter horizon and printed only weather, until he turned the third and saw, along the edge, a faint seam of pale where a hole ought to be. He labeled it refraction so he could sleep. The Coast Guard wrote their patient sentences. Search per grid, negative. Drift analyzed, probable sinking east of Caribou. Recommend closure after thaw. A senior man added in pencil, off the record, whistles heard by several credible observers. Inversion likely. Fata Morgana not ruled out. On shore, the ore dock's punch clock stamped 1 slip for Aurelia at 0400 on a Tuesday when no ship tied up. The foreman found the card warm and decided the machine had invented a kindness. In September, a dredge crew off Grand Marais brought up a hatch cleat bright as coin. The foreman measured bolt spacing that matched memory and not the catalogue. He sent it to Duluth in a wooden box labeled "From the Lake." By the time it reached the office, the cleat had bloomed rust and the pattern no longer agreed. That evening, a pilot off Thunder Bay saw a freighter running dark except for a single masthead light and the brief, square flash of a galley door. He turned to mark the bearing and discovered he had been watching his own wake elongate into something that knew how to proceed. Explanations overtook witnesses, as is their work. Men spoke of mirage, of ducts that bend sound and light, of siege pulses that make wakes without boats, of war static still wandering the ether. They are not wrong. Also true, when fog lay in two layers, the lower horn answered the upper without a ship between, and footprints appeared in rhyme on the catwalk, walking out and not returning. Now the lake keeps what it decides to keep. In a small museum on a hill above the harbor, a case holds a wheel stamped with an A that may have come from Aurelia or from a different ship that also loved its letter. Beside it lie a punch card stamped "Arrived" and a hatch tag that smells faintly of coal whenever rain is promised. A docent points with a pencil and says the word "legend" in a tone that's learned to be careful. On a wall, a chart shows sightings stitched like beads along the coast. The thread runs through Split Rock, two harbors, Whitefish, and then off into water that declines to be labeled. The lights still keep their ledgers. Every few winters, a keeper writes a faint line between bolder ones, southbound, horn long, and lets it stand without embarrassment. On certain nights, when temperature stacks the air like glass panes, a procession of lights marches on the horizon where no ship can possibly stand. A pageant of refraction called Fata Morgana by those who prefer Latin to ghosts. On other nights, a single masthead glides past the end of a pier that has known the count of bolts in every ship for 30 years. And the count comes out wrong by one. Spring breakup retells the lesson. Shore ice breathes. Black lanes open like sentences. Something moves in a speed that keeps just ahead of naming. Fishermen find pellets of ore in nets where no ore boat runs. Children bring home smooth gray stones that stain a thumb faint red. On Armistice Day, the museum puts a wreath by the case and someone knocks the glass once, gently, as if to be let in. Stand on the breakwater at dusk. The horn you hear may be wind in the cribbing, maybe a steamer, maybe a habit the lake has kept out of courtesy. No voices, only the long note over water, chain on bollard, ice finding its pitch, and the soft tick of a ledger, adding a ship that refuses subtraction.